Okay, here are just a few quick announcements. So Homework 3 will be released today after lecture. It's an extension of Homework 2. And if you haven't completed Homework 2, we'll have a good version of Homework 2 out probably, I think, Wednesday, since the slip days might interfere with that. So, yeah, and Homework 3 will be due at the same time next Sunday. And we won't be requiring the GitHub submission anymore. We think it adds a little bit too much of complexity to the homeworks. So feel free to still use GitHub, but we won't like explicitly require you to like have a screenshot and everything. But if you guys want to still use it to like manage your projects with your teammate, feel free to use it. And you will be using it for the hack challenge too. So if you still want to use it for that familiarity, you still can, but we won't require it for the homeworks. And then the challenge problems, if you want to do them, they're for extra credit. You'll get rewarded extra points if you try them out. Yeah. Now I'm just gonna go over a quick review of last lecture. Last lecture we went over a little bit of activities and like the life cycle of an activity. Um, yes. So here is activity. So what exactly are activities, right? At a very high level, each activity pertains to a screen in the app, but this isn't always true, as we'll see in the next coming lectures. Um, oh, yeah, go ahead. Activities can take up only a segment of the full screen, um, or the screen is actually a fragment, which is coming in the next lecture after the next one. Um, and or the screen is just XML. So it's just like an XML component that you just attach to the activity itself, and you can have it as that. So what does this all mean? How does this translate to an actual like in-app phone screen? So here we have Eatery, and on the left here you can see like the main menu Eatery activity, and you also see on the right here the view that shows what an Eatery is. The Eatery detail is also an activity, and then you have within that you have a fragment which just contains a portion of the activity, and then you have on the right here the XML component. Yeah, the main distinction between, I guess, this XML component of this bar graph and an activity is that activities have kind of like lifecycle methods, and the XMLs do not. So exactly are these lifecycle methods? Here's just a diagram showing kind of like the flow of how like the app works once it starts and then once it ends. It goes through these multiple different life-like stages. So far in your homeworks, we've only like touched upon one of the lifecycle methods, which is onCreate, which is called when the app is first created to get up and running. Yeah, it's first created called when the system first creates activity and developed once per activity cycle. It's where you'll be writing majority of your code. And there's also other lifecycle methods like on resume, which is called say you background the app and then you come back to it. This method is called, and it isn't initially called when the app is running, but it is called again. So it is called again once it wants to run again. So if you go to answer like a text message or something, and you swipe back to come back to the app, this lifecycle method is called. And then you have on pause here, which is called once you like begin to kind of go away from the app, but not all the way. On stop is called when the activity is no longer visible. So it kind of occurs like right after you call on pause, and it's when you actually are physically leaving the app. Everything goes on pause. And on resume is called if you want to come back from becoming on pause. And on restore is called when you want to try and destroy the activity. So it kind of happens in two cases where if you try and rotate your phone, it kind of dissipates the activity and recalls it again in the landscape mode. That's creating a whole nother kind of view. And also when the activity is finished, if you want to like go to another activity, on destroy will be called in between that like lifecycle transition. So next we're going to be covering the main topic for today, which is just intents. So what exactly are intents? An intent is an abstract description of an operation to be performed. Its most significant use is in the launching of activities, where it can be kind of thought as the glue between activities. You kind of saw a little bit of a preview of intent in, I think, homework one. It was used to transfer between the main activity and the second activity. It's basically like a passive data structure that holds an abstract description of the action to be performed. And there's two types of intents, explicit and implicit. Any questions? Okay, cool. So the first of the two types is what we're going to cover today, explicit. So what are explicit intents? Explicit intents can be used to switch to another app or to another component within your project. It's called explicit because you have to specify where exactly that you're going, destination-wise, and what you're exactly intending to. In the case where you want to switch to another activity, you must specify its name. You can create the activity with the lines here, with this val intent equals intent, this target activity. You can use the this keyword to specify the current activity that you're intending from, and then the second argument is the target, is where you're going. If you notice in the second argument, it's tagged with this like : class.java. This is a backwards compatibility system where Andrew's intent class was initially built in Java and expects a Java class even if target activity is written in Kotlin. You don't really have to worry about the specifics of that. Just know that if you want to try, if you're providing a second argument to intent to go to somewhere else, you have to add this : class.java. And afterwards, whenever we want to actually transition to activity, perhaps in the on-click of a button or just regularly, you can launch the intent using the start activity intent. And then in between these two lines, this put extra, if you want to pass information to your target activity, you can put extra data in your intent as so. And in between activities, you can pass in strings, numbers, booleans, and even objects. And in the target activity, you can retrieve the information as such. You can get intent, get extras, get string, and in the argument here, you have to put in the key of what was inputted when you were putting in the extra in the first place. The eatery name, and it's retrieving that same key in the target activity under that same key as well with this eatery name. Any questions about that? Okay, cool. So yeah, if you have an experience with Python, it's very similar to adding keys to dictionaries, like key value pairs. It's kind of how the intent put extra is kind of represented as, where you're putting in values to multiple different keys with this put extra and specifying what the key and what the value is. So here's just an example of kind of how explicit intents work more explicitly. We're using eatery as an example again. So you have this necessity cell here. And when I click on it, I want to transition to an activity that displays information about bare necessities. So I click it, I make an intent, I put the eatery name, bare necessities, I retrieve from the backend information about that eatery, and then I can actually display the activity and transition to the activity that displays that information. So these are two separate activities that are glued together with an intent to transition between the two of them. Yeah. So explicit intents kind of allow you to flow between different screens on your app, and you can have multiple screens at the same time. Not at the same time, but in your project. And then the next type of intent are implicit intents. Right. Okay. So what exactly are implicit intents? So implicit intents do not name a specific component, but instead declare a general action to perform, which allows a component for another app to handle it. For example, if you want to show the user a location on a map, you can use an implicit intent to request that another capable app show the specified location on a map. So you don't really care what app does that specific action, just what the action to be done. So I want the location to be shown. I don't care if Google Maps does it. I don't care if Apple Maps does it. I just want the location shown to the user. And then implicit intents kind of allow you to do that by specifying another app. And ultimately, if there is multiple capable apps that the user can perform a specified action with, the user will be able to choose which app launches if there's multiple. Um, and the implicit intent structure kind of follows similarly to the explicit intent structures, but it kind of depends on what type of implicit intent that you want to do. For example, if you want to send an email, that requires much more different fields than if you want to send a text message. For example, you might need the subject or the email or the message itself. So it all depends on what kind of intent that you want to send. These are just some different examples of intents here. You have creating a shortcut for the app, turning information to another app, turning off the device screen, and setting an alarm. So this is kind of just showcasing kind of like the intent structure and how it looks like. On the left here, you see like the different intent, like put extra keys that you have to specify. And in this example on the right, it's kind of like how it's framed. So it specifies like an action send for an email. And then it put extras, the subject and the email itself. And then it does that start activity again to launch that intent. And then here's an example video. Let's see if I can play it. So here's an example of sending a message. So when we try to send a message, you see how there's multiple apps that come up for how we can send this message. In this case, we're choosing Instagram to send a message, but you could have chose anything else to still display that information. So in this case, I think we're sending a link. And just like that, the link is sent to the user. So that was the message that was sent in the intent. It was that link, and it was sent through Instagram, but it could have been through any other app that's capable of sending that message. And here's just another app too. Here's another example too. In this case, I think it's a phone number example, but in this case, there's only one app that's capable of handling like calling phone numbers. So it goes straight to the app instead of giving a user their choice, because there only is one app that can actually do that. So examples, not any example, any questions on implicit intent? Okay, cool. So next we're gonna go over the manifest. So I went over the manifest briefly, I think in week 1 of this class. So it kind of comes back and rears its ugly head back again. Yes, so the manifest, again, it contains crucial information about the app, like the application name, the activities, the fragments, requested permissions, and software requirements. Each activity in the app must be declared in the manifest, and generally Android will automatically do this, so you don't have to really worry about it. But where the manifest comes into play for this lecture is permissions. Because in manifests themselves, you have to declare what permissions you want explicitly. And here's an example of how intents are used in the manifest itself. So every application must specify the activity that acts as the entry point with action main. And this is generally done automatically with the main activity or whatever your first activity name is when you create the project itself. So if you want to change it, then you can explicitly change it by just moving these lines around. So in the case where a user chooses your app to launch to, or someone explicitly intends to your app, they're introduced to whatever activity has this launcher intent, unless your app supports deep linking, which is more on that later. Next, we're covering permissions. And as stated earlier, the manifest is a place where you put any permissions that you're trying to ask for. So what exactly are permissions? You probably run into permissions many times in your daily use of apps. Think, an example. Think an app trying to access your location, for example, that's a permission. Or an app trying to sync up your contacts to try and get whoever is on the app, whoever is in your contacts on the app. That's also another permission. And common permissions include location, internet use, if you want to access a user's storage or their camera. Those are all permissions that you have to ask for. And yeah, again, you have to specify all required permissions in the manifest file. Here's just an example for accessing someone's fine location, which is their exact location. You can use this permission to try and access that. But there's a little caveat to that, of course. And that comes with the two types of permissions. So you have your normal permissions and you have your dangerous permissions. Oh my gosh. So normal permissions are automatically granted. You only have to worry about asking explicitly like from the user permission to use that certain permission. Normal permissions allow you access to data and actions that extend beyond your app's environment. However, the data and actions present very little risk to the user's privacy and the operation of other apps, so the permissions are automatically granted without explicitly asking for permission. Example, normal permissions include, I think internet access is one, or accessing Bluetooth. Like those don't require breaching on a user's privacy, so you can just automatically do them without having to worry about asking for the permission of your user. Where you do have to ask for permission is where you get into dangerous permissions. So um, they're also known as runtime permissions, that's the official name, but they're also considered dangerous permissions. So these permissions give your app additional access to restricted data, and they allow your app to perform restricted actions that substantially affect the system and other apps. An example runtime permission would be an app requesting your files, like this example on the right, because of course that's sensitive data. There's a lot of things in your file that you don't like apps to have to access, so you have to be explicit about what you're trying to access from the user. And when you're asking for these permissions, make sure that you're being as transparent as possible. If you really need a permission from a user to make your app functional, it's important that you're transparent about what you're using these permissions for. Otherwise, they'll be reluctant on why you're trying to use it. For example, if I'm just trying to get a user's location, I would want to know why. You have to be explicit about why you're doing these things. Right. So for instance, a user's willingness to grant access to a location will vary based on whether or not the request is required to support the app's core functionality. So for example, if I want to give my location to an app like Google Maps, of course I would, because location is essential for an app like that. But sometimes I wouldn't want to give my location in the case where an app might use that to sell it or to try and gain something financial or a data mine off of me. So yes. Yeah, again, make sure that your app adequately responds to and then in the case where a user does deny your permissions, you have to account for that in your app flow. So if your user does say no to your permission access, make sure you account for this in your app design and flow. Because of course, if your app depends on the functionality of a permission and they don't allow it, you have to account for how you can navigate that space of not having that permission now. I think if you're using like Google Maps, for example, and you don't allow permissions, they kind of like direct you back to the settings where you have to enable it. So you can kind of do something like that if you really need the permission bad from the user. And here's just an example of like kind of like how some apps kind of do it. So if a user denies the permission and if the permission is essential for the app, it could present like another like text to explain the reason why the app asked for the permission and then ask again. Or they can also just deny outright and then you have to account for that fact too by either closing the app or maybe directing them to the settings or just like limiting the experience of your app by closing down functionality. And here's just another example of kind of how permissions work granting access. So if you don't have any internet or you don't grant internet access, you'll get this like screen on TikTok. Or if you're trying to request, if they're trying to request camera access to record a video, this is kind of how it looks like too, or requesting access on the side. And here's just kind of like a graphic that kind of sums everything up in terms of like the workflow for how you should think about permissions. So use permissions as little as possible. Generally, like if you don't need it, don't ask for it. It comes with that fact of like privacy respecting the user. Don't overstep your boundaries as an app. Like don't try and access their storage if you don't need it, or don't. Just have that kind of contract between user and self. If you do need permission, declare it to the manifest. And then if it's a dangerous permission or rental permission, ask and give a reason to why you need to use it. And then carry forward with your app using that permission. Or if you don't have it, then you have to account for that also. But yeah, that's the end of lecture. Any questions about permissions? Okay, cool.
So I have set it up a main activity with an edit tag and with two buttons. For one of the button, what I want to achieve is that when I click next, it's gonna send me to a different activity, and with it's gonna have a screen showing whatever that I entered in the edit text. So now we're gonna see how we can make it work. So let's go to the main activity. I have already found view by ID of the components I created, and now I'm gonna write on-click listener for the button next. So as we just talked about, in order to go to a different activity, we have to use an explicit intent. So we can declare the intent inside this on-click listener. So the intent will have two parameters. The first one is that you're going to tell the intent which context you are currently in. In this case, we're just doing this. And for the second part of the intent, we're gonna have like which activity you're gonna migrate to and navigate to after the after the button is getting clicked. So I already created an activity called main activity 2. Oh, wait a second. Actually, never mind. I think I need to have this outside of this on-click listener because this for the on-click listener is actually the view itself. Why is this time? Nope. I just had a wrong grammar issue. And it's like this. Okay. And now because I want to send something between like activities, so I need to do intent dot put extra. And the first parameter will be like the key for this bundle, and the second parameter will be whatever that I want the information to be. So I'm gonna make the key text, and then the information will be edit text.text. So whatever I enter in the edit text. And inside button next, I'm gonna start the activity. But I'm first gonna check, I'm gonna make sure that the edit text will not be like empty string. I don't want to send like an empty string to a new activity. So I'm gonna first do a check for that. Okay, so let's see if it works. gonna write something. Android. Oh, oh, sorry, I forgot something. I also need to go to the activity that I'm gonna receive in the text, and I'm also gonna like receive it because in the main activity I just sent it, and in the new activity I kind of need to like catch it. So how you catch it is you get like intent get extra. In this case, it's get string extra, and I'm gonna enter the key that I just choose. So this text view is something that I set up in my activity, and I'm gonna replace whatever I have right here to the text that I entered. Let's do that again. Wait. Huh. It did not send. It's interesting. Put this inside. Technical difficulty. Gosh, why this is always. It's no. What? Wait. Oh wait. Maybe this is. I need to use toString for this because edit text.text is actually not a string, it's a text object, I think. Okay, now it works. Apparently I have to like not only because in this case I'm passing an object rather than a string, so that's why when I say get string extra, it was not able to get it. That is for this is an example for explicit intent. You, besides string, you can also do like int, array. There's a lot of things you can pass between, and you can even pass like a picture in like a URL form. Now we're gonna go to the implicit intent that if we can have the user enter something in the same edit text, and if we click send, it's gonna pop up like something that allows users to send the whatever they entered to somebody else. So I'm gonna create a new on-click listener for the send button. Again, I'm gonna do a check to make sure that the edit text is not empty. I'm gonna create a send intent. In this case, it's just gonna have like it doesn't gonna have any parameters because we're gonna further define it. So we define that the send intent has an action of action send. We can also put in like what exactly we want to send with this put extra intent extra text, which means like intent dot extra text is just kind of a key that's specified by Android Studio that this intent will know you're gonna make whatever you enter here to be like the text that's being sent. There's other things that you can put extra. For example, you can specify your phone number. You can specify if you want to send a picture. Those are all options. So again, we're gonna make this edit text to be something that you send. In addition to this, I also want to specify a phone number. And sorry, I forgot this is T, not D again. I'm just gonna enter whatever number here. And in the end, we need to specify what kinds of intent it is. It's intent that like sends plain text. It's not anything that's image or URL or something. So I'm gonna specify it here. In the end, I'm gonna start the activity. Intent. Send. Okay. So let's also send Android. Oh, not next.
Wow.
It has a number that I pre-entered. You can actually make this a variable, like something that user entered, but in this case it's constant. And I click its phone number, and it has the text that I just entered here.
Wow. That's crazy.
And I also have an example for you can create like a list and then send to an activity. I'm not sure if I have time for it.
820. Got it.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure.
Hopefully, I don't know how intricate your example is, but
I don't want to create more components, but in this case, I'm gonna change the send button to call it like, let's say add. So what I want to achieve here is that every time, did I accidentally deleted this? Okay, every time I click add, I'm gonna add whatever user entered here into a list, and then I'm gonna pass this whole list to main activity 2, and then I wanna finally put the main activity, like the list into like a spinner. So let's see how far we can get. It's still named button.send, so let's just view this as an add button. But yeah, I'm gonna first create a array list. So if whatever in the edit text is not empty, I'm gonna add the text into the array list. Oh. Sorry, initialize this wrong. And if the next button is getting clicked, I'm gonna use this put string array list extra. It's such a long name, but just bear with me. This is kind of easy for you to search all of the options you have here. What I just did, I just searched for like array list when I want to search for a method. But just gonna when I get to the activity 2, I'm also gonna try to catch the array list I just sent. And then I'm gonna put a spinner inside. I'm gonna put a spinner inside this. And then I'm gonna also get it from the column file. Get the spinner, find it by ID. Again, if you guys remember from the recitation last week, for spinner, you need to create adapter for spinner to load the informations. This is such a long thing. Oh wait, it's saying that it's a. It's just saying that if the array list is null, it's gonna be like complex. It's not gonna be working. So I'm just claiming over here that I'm gonna make sure it's not null. Spinner adapter. Okay. Let's see if it works. So we're first gonna add something. Say let's add apple. Let's add pineapple. So see, you can pass the array and then it has both of the things that I just entered here in the spinner. So this is just an example of how to pass array, and you guys can also try how to pass integers and maybe pass the object that you create on your own. That's all we have for today. Let me know if you guys have any questions.
I guess we can go over the homework that we passed.
I know. You sure?
Yeah. Are you finished your?
Yes.
Yeah.